Kia ora whānau, my name's Cleo and I'm the Junior Policy Analyst and Health Promoter for WHA. Today we're going to talk to Aych about their CEDAW report in collaboration with us.
Aych, and I'm here to give you a quick Digi-Update on some awesome news that's come out of the United Nations over the last few weeks. So many months ago, Women's Health Action contributed to the Pacific Women's Watch NGO Shadow Report to the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination against Women pre-sessional working group ahead of New Zealand's review. So this is an opportunity for civil society to get together and tell the UN what's going on and what it's like for women living in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So the 4 key issues that Women's Health Action identified in our report were around abortion decriminalisation, the gendered impacts of welfare reform, violence against women in the family court, and issues relating to our rainbow community. On abortion decriminalisation, Women's Health Action's recommendations to the committee were that New Zealand remove abortion as a criminal offence under the Contraception, Sterilisation and Abortion Act and implement an informed consent model for terminations of pregnancy. We also recommended that New Zealand should expand the eligibility criteria for access to subsidised family planning services and contraception costs in Aotearoa. Our second issue, the gendered impacts of welfare reform, specifically for children dependent on welfare. We made many key points on what it's like being in a benefit-dependent household, and when the state intervenes and cuts that benefit for an arbitrary reason, obviously that impacts on every member of the whānau, but particularly children. So our recommendations was that the New Zealand government ensure the security of benefits for women-headed households with dependent children. Now, number 3, violence against women in the family court. This has been in the media quite a bit over the last week or so, based on some of the conversations that we've had over in Geneva. We brought stories to the committee explaining how many whānau, when they're going through proceedings in the family court, it's generally not because things are going so well in whānau, and it can be a really traumatising experience. But there are certain actions that the court takes that often re-traumatise family violence victims, often women and almost always children. So we recommended that New Zealand develops an independent oversight mechanism for the family court to ensure the quality of practice and uphold the principles of natural justice and due process. We also recommended that New Zealand make available specialist family violence legal experts at low or no cost to all families accessing the family court. Often the financial pressures of going through these processes place extra stress on whānau in times of difficulty. And on our 4th point on the well-being of our rainbow communities, we had a few points under this. So under our schools recommendations, we recommended that New Zealand provides the money to fund training for all schools in New Zealand on the updated sexuality education guidelines that came out a few years ago. We also recommended that they become part of the mandatory health curriculum. We also directed or recommended that the Education Review Office assess a school's competency in adhering to these guidelines in their reporting on schools. We want to make sure that schools are a safe place for all children to learn and grow, and the Education Review Office play a really huge part. Now on Statistics New Zealand, they've been in the media a little bit over the last year or so since our last census. And we noted that the invisibility of rainbow peoples within Statistics New Zealand and the way that they count data is having huge impacts on our rainbow communities. So one of the simple suggestions we made was that Statistics New Zealand take action on implementing an effective statistical standard for gender identity across health, justice and social development services in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Again, we can't measure success if we're not counting it in the beginning. We also, going back to schools, we also noted the lack of long-term funding and sustainable planning that rainbow community support organisations are able to do in Aotearoa due to the tight funding perimeters that they face. So we encourage the government to consider larger scale and long-term funding of social support organisations advocating for the needs of people with diverse sexualities, gender identities and sex characteristics. Our final point in our report was around mental health and suicidality in rainbow communities. We explained to the committee that Aotearoa, for the 2nd or 3rd time running I think it is, has left out rainbow communities in our National Suicide Action Plan. So we made a recommendation to the committee and also to our government that New Zealand engages with people with diverse sexualities, gender identities and sex characteristics in the development of the national strategy to prevent suicide in Aotearoa. Part 2. What did the committee say? So we went to the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women to let them know how things are going in Aotearoa and what it's like. Alongside lots of other civil society organisations who also presented to the committee, the New Zealand government also made a presentation. They got to respond to any criticism or praise. The committee then considers all of that information and then they put out a big report and a list of recommendations to our government. Now our government gets to decide which recommendations they make any commitments to or which ones they decide to reject. So we should know that soon, what our government is going to commit to doing. But for now, let me share with you the concluding observations on the 8th Periodic Report of New Zealand. The committee noted some of the positive things we've done, but let's cut to the chase and get to the juicy stuff. So, some of the specific recommendations that we're really excited about that spoke to some of the specific recommendations we made in our report were around the definition of equality and non-discrimination. So the committee recommended to New Zealand that we immediately amend our Human Rights Act to include specific protections on the grounds of gender identity, gender expression and sex characteristics. This is a huge win and we hope that Minister Andrew Little is listening closely to that one. Again, on the family court, the committee really noted the lack of gender sensitivity within the judiciary and the decrease in availability of legal aid in whānau going through those family court proceedings. The committee recommended that the New Zealand government strengthen gender responsiveness and gender sensitivity within our judiciary and family court by increasing things such as women lawyers and the availability of legal aid. Our intersex community got a huge win in this report. The committee recommended that New Zealand immediately adopt clear legislative provisions explicitly preventing the performance of unnecessary surgical or other medical treatment on intersex children before they reach an age of consent, to provide families of intersex children with adequate counselling and support, and to provide redress for intersex people having undergone medical treatment that wasn't up to where they wanted it to be, which is an awesome and huge win for us. The committee also noted and took great lengths to explain the gender-based violence against women that New Zealand experience, particularly in whānau violence rates and their presentation within the New Zealand family courts. We had a huge win around sexuality education in schools through this report. The committee noted that the lack of education or the lack of inclusive sexuality education in Aotearoa and recommended some immediate changes. Some of these things included that school curricula includes culturally sensitive and age-appropriate education in sexual, reproductive health and rights and responsible sexual behaviour, focusing on the prevention and consequences of early pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. Another huge one from this report was recommendations to our government around decriminalisation of abortion. So the specific wording from the committee that came back to our government was to remove abortion from the Crimes Act and amend the Contraception, Sterilisation and Abortion Act 1977 in order for abortion to be fully decriminalised and incorporated into health services legislation. This is a huge win and something we will support the government in providing all of the steps necessary to get there. And our final recommendation from the committee that we are super excited about is that the committee really recognised the trauma and experiences of many whānau going through the family court. The committee recommended that our government establish a Royal Commission of Inquiry with an independent mandate to engage in wide-ranging evaluation of the drawbacks and obstruction of justice and safety for women inherent in family court systems, and to recommend legislative and structural changes necessary for making the family court safe and just for women and children, particularly in situations of family violence. This is a huge win and something we encourage our government to take incredibly seriously. seriously. We thank the committee for taking the time to really listen to civil society and our concerns, and now we lay these challenges down to our government to seriously consider the recommendations that the committee has made.